So today we have to walk through association mapping. Based on cardinality, association mapping is divided into three types. So what is cardinality? Cardinality means number of objects participating in database operation. So the types of association mapping is one-to-one mapping, one-to-many mapping, many-to-many mapping. Based on directionality, association mapping is divided into two types. First one is unidirectional and another one is bidirectional. Basically, unidirectional and bidirectional is nothing. The main thing inside the association mapping that you have to remember is one-to-one mapping, one-to-many mapping, and many-to-many mapping. This is all what we have to go through in the association mapping. So let's understand first what is association mapping with the help of diagrams. Suppose we have two classes, customer and address. So there should be some relationship between customer and address. Remember, when we have a student class and a current student class, then there is a relationship between those classes. So in here, customer and address have a relationship which is going to be called as has a relationship. Has a relationship. So customer and address is in relationship which can be called as has a relationship. Customer has address, but what is happening at the time of inheritance mapping? In inheritance mapping, there is a student, another class is current student, so we cannot say that current student has a student, or we also cannot say that student has a current student. Here the relationship is a relationship. Is a relationship. The relationship between current student and student is a relationship. So you can say student is a current student, or you can say that current student is a student, but you cannot say that current student has a student or a student has a current student. So whenever we are talking about is a relationship, then we are going to use inheritance mapping. So a student is a current student, or a current student is a student. Current student is not has a student. Current student has a student. This is not what you are going to say. You have to say that current student is a student. But when we have has a relationship, like in case of customer and address, customer has an address. Customer is a address, you can't say that, or address is a customer. This is also wrong. Customer has an address, or there is some address which has a customer. So whenever we are talking about has a relationship, you have to use association mapping. So whenever we are talking about has a relationship, then we have to use association mapping. I think you got the idea. Whenever we are talking about has a relationship, we are going to use association mapping. But in association mapping, we have three types: one-to-one mapping, one-to-many mapping, one-to-many mapping, and many-to-many mapping. What are these things? So let's understand it with the diagram. Suppose there is a customer and he have address. So for customer, we are going to create table in Hibernate, and for address, Hibernate will create by default table, not we are going to create table. Then we have to establish relationship between the customer and address. What can be other use cases of this association mapping? So this is one case in which we have customer and address. So we have to establish relationship between these. So it is has a relationship, customer and address. What else situations that we can see? Suppose there is a customer and customer has accounts, multiple accounts. One customer can have multiple accounts. So one customer has multiple accounts. But what will happen if we see this from the opposite side? One account is not going to have multiple customers. One account is not going to have multiple customers. One account is always going to belong to one customer. One customer can have multiple accounts, but an account is always going to be belong to one customer. One account can't belong to multiple customers, but one customer can have multiple accounts. So next scenario that we can see in a has a relationship is, suppose there is a student and one student can be enrolled in multiple courses. Suppose Hindi, Math, English, Sanskrit. One student can be enrolled inside the multiple courses. And from the opposite side, if you see, one course can have multiple student. One course can have multiple student. And one student can also be enrolled into multiple courses. So these are the use cases or scenarios that we can see in our daily working life. So on this use cases basis, our association mapping is divided into three types: one-to-one mapping, one-to-many mapping, and many mapping. Again, what is association mapping? Whenever we are seeing has a relationship between two entities, then we are going to use association mapping. If you see in the case of a student, it is not a has a relationship. Current student has a student or a student has a current student. You can't say that. You always have to say that a student is a current student or current student is a student. So it is not a has a relationship. It is a relationship. Now in the case of here, customer and address, it is has a relationship. Customer is one class and address is one class. For both this class, table is going to get created, and between those tables there is going to be has a relationship. Customer is going to have address. Customer has address, or you can say address, one address has customer. Other example is one customer can have multiple accounts, and one account is also going to belong always to one customer. One account always going to belong to one customer, not multiple customers. So basis of this, in association mapping, it got divided into three types. Look right here, it is a has a relationship, means it is going to be in association mapping. So we have customer has address. What else can be done? If you see this relationship from the address side, what you will get is address has a customer. Either customer has address or address has a customer. One customer cannot have multiple addresses. You can understand that one customer cannot have multiple addresses. So it is one-to-one relationship. One-to-one relationship. Customer has an address. It is one-to-one relationship. What is happening in one-to-many relationship? Suppose there is a customer, class, and we have accounts. So one customer can have multiple accounts, but one account is always going to belong to one customer, not multiple customer. One account cannot belong to multiple customer. So it is one to many. You can see here customer is one, and on the other side we have accounts. One customer has multiple accounts. So it is one to many. One customer has many accounts. But if you try to see from the opposite side of account, then one account is always going to belong to one customer. So it cannot be many to one. It is always one to many. In the third case, one student can have multiple courses, and from the other side, if you see, this student is enrolled in this course, but this course, suppose this is maths, so one student is enrolled inside multiple courses, and the one course is math. But in math there should be another students enrolled. So the relationship right here is many to many. One student can enrolled in multiple courses, and from the other side, if you see, one course can have multiple students. So from this side of a student, it is one to many, and also from the course side is one to many. So it becomes many to many. Many students can be enrolled in the single course, and from the other side, many courses can also have multiple students. You can see one student can enroll in many courses, and particular course can also have multiple students. So it becomes many to many relationship. So this is what association mapping is. So as we have talked that on the basis of cardinality, association mapping is divided in three types: one to one to many, and many to many. But on the basis of directionality, it is also divided in two types: unidirectional and bidirectional. What this unidirectional and bidirectional actually means, let's see. Suppose here is a customer and address which is inside relationship has a customer has address, or you can say address has a customer. So directionality basically means the access of the other object. What directionality represent is that the access of the another entity. So from customer you can access address. From customer you can access address. But so this becomes unidirectional. But what if from address you can also access customer object? So this becomes bidirectional. If it is unidirectional, then by only one side you can access the other entity. From customer you can access the address. But if it is in the relationship where you can also access from the address to customer, then it becomes bidirectional. What if it is something like this? Address has a customer. You can access customer from address, but you cannot access the address from the customer. So it become unidirectional. It is not bidirectional right now. But if you can access from both ways, from address you can access customer, and also from the customer you can access the address, then it become bidirectional. So the unidirectional and bidirectional, basically you will understand this when we are doing the codes. If you are able to access some other element entity class in only one directional, then it is unidirectional. And if you can access both from both side, then it become bidirectional. If you can access address from customer and also customer from address, then it become bidirectional. So you will figure out much more easy to understand when we are doing codes. So what is one-to-one relationship in association mapping? What is one-to-one mapping? So remember this example, customer has a address. Customer cannot have multiple address. So from this side, there is only one address, and from also address side, address is only going to belong to one customer. One address cannot belong to multiple customers. So from both side, one customer can have single address, and one address always going to belong to single customer, not multiple customer. So it is one to one from both side. So it is one to one mapping. Remember the examples, customer and address. In one to many, what is happening? One customer can have multiple accounts. So it become one to many. One to many. One customer can have multiple accounts, but one account is always going to belong to one customer. One account cannot belong to multiple customers. So from this side, from customer side, it is one to many mapping. And from this side of accounts, one account is always going to belong one customer. So it becomes one to one, but it is not one to one because there is multiple accounts. One customer can have multiple accounts. One customer can have multiple accounts. So from customer side, it is one to many. And if you see from account side, then one account is always going to belong to one customer. But in here, one customer have multiple accounts. So you can understand this in both ways. One customer have multiple accounts, so it becomes one to many. But if you do from opposite side, accounts, multiple accounts is always belonging to one customer, not multiple customer. One account belongs to one customer, not multiple customer, and all these accounts are also belonging to the same customer, which means one to many mapping. One customer have multiple accounts, and all these accounts are also belonging to one customer. So one to many mapping, and if we reverse this, it becomes many to many mapping. It becomes many to one mapping. You don't have to understand many to one mapping right now. You only have to understand these three: one to one to many, and many to many. So just remember this example. One customer can have multiple accounts, but one account is always going to belong to one customer. So one customer have multiple accounts. One to many. Another example that you have to remember is many to many association mapping. One student has a multiple course: English, Hindi, computer, maths. But the English course is going to have multiple students. So from this side, it becomes one to many. From a student side, one student can have multiple courses, but also from the course side, it becomes one course can hold multiple students. Multiple students can be get enrolled inside the particular courses. So it becomes one to many. It becomes many to many in both ways. So just remember the examples. That's all you have to do in the association mapping. In one-to-one mapping, just remember the customer and address relationship. One customer belong to one address, and one address always belong to one customer. In one-to-many mapping, one customer can have multiple accounts, but one account is always going to belong to one customer. In many to many, one student can be enrolled in multiple courses, but one course can have multiple students. So it becomes many to many association mapping. Let's do the example so you can understand it clearly. So first we are going to see one-to-one mapping, which is customer to address. Don't get bothered about this unidirectional and bidirectional right now. Just remember the example for one-to-one mapping. So in next video, we will do example for one-to-one mapping. Customer has address and address always belong to one customer. So stay tuned.